An old photograph lies faded with time. A man with wild, unkempt hair, eyes that seem to pierce through centuries, and a half-smile that suggests he knows something the rest of humanity has yet to grasp. His name has become synonymous with genius, but behind that image, printed endlessly on posters, coffee mugs, and t-shirts, was a human being more complex, conflicted, and fascinating than any caricature. What if I told you that Albert Einstein, the man who bent the universe with mathematics, spent his nights writing letters filled with doubts, pain, and longing? What if the greatest mind of the 20th century wrestled with failures as deeply personal as they were universal? And what if the very man who redefined reality itself struggled to hold together his own? This is not the story of equations alone. It is the story of a man who stood at the crossroads of brilliance and brokenness, of public triumph and private heartbreak. Einstein's life was more than physics. It was a symphony of curiosity, resilience, and contradiction. His ideas lit the way for new understandings of space, time, and energy, yet his heart carried shadows that few ever saw. Imagine the paradox. A man adored across continents, yet estranged from his own sons, celebrated as a prophet of science, yet yearning for simple human connection. He once declared that imagination was more important than knowledge. And perhaps that was true not just for his theories, but for the way he tried to navigate a world that rarely understood him. To step into Einstein's intellectual and personal life is to enter a realm where genius collides with vulnerability. His published works became textbooks studied by generations of students, and his theories reshaped how we measure the very fabric of reality. Still, between those triumphs, he poured out over 3,500 pages of correspondence, letters that reveal not just his thoughts on physics, but his meditations on politics, philosophy, and the mysteries of religion. Each page is like a window, opening not into a laboratory of experiments, but into the mind of a man who never stopped asking questions. Yet, amid the glowing spotlight of worldwide fame, Einstein remained modest, often dismissing the celebrity thrust upon him. He never chased wealth, he chased curiosity. To him, the act of wondering, of looking at the universe with childlike awe, was worth more than gold. But here lies the paradox again. While the world worshipped his intellect, his home life was fractured. His marriages were strained, his children often distant, and the great physicist could not apply his theories of harmony to the fragile equations of family. This is the human side of Einstein, the side that history books often gloss over, the side where brilliance meets loneliness. And it is in exploring both, the genius and the man, that we uncover a legacy far deeper than formulas written on paper. Albert Einstein's intellectual journey was both monumental and restless. His scientific works did not simply influence academia. They became cornerstones of modern science, cemented into the foundations of physics as unshakable truths. When he introduced the special theory of relativity in 1905, the world of science shook. Suddenly, space and time were no longer absolute backdrops, but interconnected dimensions shaped by motion. A few years later, with his general theory of relativity, he extended this vision, proposing that gravity was not a force acting at a distance, but the warping of space-time itself. These ideas became more than theory. They became the language through which physicists explained the cosmos. His equations would guide not only the discovery of black holes, but the expansion of the universe itself. But Einstein's intellectual legacy was not confined to relativity. He contributed to quantum theory, though famously resisting some of its implications, leading to heated debates with contemporaries like Niels Bohr. While others embraced quantum uncertainty, Einstein insisted God does not play dice with the universe. His discomfort with randomness reflected his deeper belief in an ordered reality. He sought a unified field theory, a grand equation tying all forces together, though he never found it. Still, his relentless pursuit of such a theory embodied his unyielding curiosity. Curiosity, indeed, was the engine of his life. He often said that he had no special talent, only a passion for questioning. And perhaps this was the secret. Unlike many, he never allowed childhood wonder to wither. As an adult, he could still gaze at the stars with the awe of a boy who once received a compass and marveled at the invisible force guiding its needle. To Einstein, each unanswered question was not a barrier, but an invitation. His writings, spanning science, politics, and philosophy, reflects constant hunger for understanding. He wrote about pacifism, warning of the dangers of war. He wrote about freedom, democracy, and the need for ethical responsibility in the atomic age. He wrote about religion, rejecting dogma, but embracing a cosmic spirituality rooted in awe of the universe. His correspondence reveals a thinker who, even at the height of fame, sought meaning beyond acclaim. Yet, despite the vastness of his intellect, Einstein remained strikingly humble. He avoided the trappings of wealth and power, often appearing in worn sweaters, uninterested in fashion or luxury. Fame followed him relentlessly. Crowds gathered, photographers clicked, journalists begged for quotes, but he treated it all with indifference. To him, the pursuit of truth was sacred, while fame was trivial. The important thing, he once said, is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. In those words lies a manifesto for his life. But Einstein's personal world was far less harmonious than the beauty of his equations. His family life was troubled, marred by estrangement and unfulfilled bonds. His first marriage to Mileva Maric, once a collaborator in his early work, collapsed under the weight of neglect and infidelity. Their relationship deteriorated into bitterness, leaving deep scars. His sons Hans and Eduard felt the distance most acutely. Hans, though eventually building his own life as an engineer, carried a complex relationship with his father, torn between admiration and resentment. Eduard, the younger son, struggled with mental illness, ultimately living much of his life in psychiatric care. Einstein's inability to connect with him deeply haunted the physicist. He once admitted that he had failed his son, and this sorrow lingered like an unfinished equation. His second marriage to Elsa, his cousin, provided companionship but not serenity. Their union, too, carried strains, exacerbated by Einstein's infidelities and the unrelenting demands of his public life. Letters reveal that while he could unravel the secrets of the cosmos, he often faltered in the delicate work of human intimacy. For all his brilliance, Einstein was not immune to selfishness, nor was he free from the flaws that plague ordinary men. In this contrast lies the essence of his humanity. To the world, Einstein was a sage, a prophet of science. To his family, he was often absent, distant, and complicated. His genius could illuminate galaxies, but it could not always light the hearth of home. And yet, this very duality makes him more relatable, more real. He was not a perfect man. He was a man with extraordinary gifts, wrestling with ordinary struggles. Even in his later years, when the world placed him on a pedestal, Einstein never ceased to question himself. He spent his final decades in Princeton, New Jersey, walking to his office with papers under his arm, chasing equations that might unify all of nature. Visitors found him approachable, often greeted with kindness and humor. Students recalled his warmth and willingness to discuss ideas, no matter how simple or naive. Yet behind the smile, there was always a lingering solitude, a man aware of both his triumphs and his failures. As we reflect on Einstein's intellectual and personal life, we are left with a mosaic of brilliance and imperfection. His works reshaped our understanding of the universe. His writings expanded our vision of human responsibility, and his humility inspired generations. But his troubled family life reminds us that even the greatest minds cannot escape the complexities of being human. Perhaps this is why his story endures. Not just because he gave us relativity or helped inspire the age of atomic energy, but because he embodied the paradox of genius, extraordinary in thought, ordinary in struggle. Einstein once remarked, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." These words echo as both confession and challenge. They remind us that curiosity is the root of discovery, that even without perfection, one can leave a legacy that reshapes the world. And perhaps that is Einstein's greatest gift, not just the theories and the equations, but the reminder that it is curiosity, above all, that propels humanity forward. In the end, Albert Einstein was not merely a scientist, nor merely a man. He was both. He was the dreamer who saw the invisible threads of reality, and the flawed human who struggled with love and loss. He was the voice that warned of destruction, and the heart that longed for peace. His life teaches us that genius is not a shield against pain, but a light that shines despite it. And that light, his curiosity, his questions, his humanity, continues to guide us through the mysteries of the universe. Albert Einstein is remembered as the man who rewrote the laws of physics, the scientist whose wild hair and penetrating eyes came to symbolize genius itself. But behind the equations and the blackboards, there existed another Einstein, a man deeply engaged with the moral struggles of the 20th century, a thinker who was as fearless in his political and social convictions as he was in challenging Newtonian mechanics. And if one looks closer, one discovers a lifelong pacifist, a critic of unchecked power, a voice for humanity in an age of chaos, and even a man watched by his own government for daring to speak truths that many considered dangerous. It might surprise some that the same mind that envisioned curved space-time also envisioned a more just society, a society where violence was rejected, exploitation dismantled, and cooperation extended beyond national borders. Because Einstein was not merely a scientist who studied the cosmos, he was a human being who felt the weight of war, injustice, and the fragility of peace pressing down upon his conscience. And from the earliest days of his adult life, he declared himself opposed to militarism in every form, horrified by the destructive machinery of empires and armies that reduced human life to expendable numbers. His pacifism was not casual, but lifelong, rooted in a belief that war represented the failure of human imagination. And when the First World War erupted in 1914, Einstein stood almost alone among German intellectuals, refusing to sign the infamous Manifesto of the 93, in which scholars pledged allegiance to Germany's war effort. Instead, he aligned himself with a tiny minority who denounced the slaughter, and for this he was mocked, labeled naive, even unpatriotic. Yet he remained firm, declaring that war could never be justified as a solution to human conflict, that reason and dialogue must always replace the brutality of weapons. And over the years, his stance only deepened, reinforced by his admiration for figures like Mahatma Gandhi, whose philosophy of nonviolent resistance resonated deeply with him. Einstein saw in Gandhi not weakness, but immense moral courage, the courage to stand unarmed before power and still resist it. And he praised Gandhi publicly as the greatest political genius of his time, a man whose methods revealed that true strength came not from domination, but from steadfastness in the face of oppression. Indeed, Einstein would often write about Gandhi with reverence, suggesting that humanity's future depended on adopting such methods, rather than clinging to the outdated idea that war could settle disputes. And in this, we see Einstein not just as a physicist, but as a philosopher of peace, one who believed that violence poisoned the soul of nations and corroded the bonds of civilization. But Einstein's vision of a better world extended beyond pacifism. He was equally outspoken about economic injustice, deeply critical of capitalism, which he believed led inevitably to inequality, greed, and the concentration of power in the hands of the few. He saw with clear eyes the devastation of the Great Depression, the waves of unemployment, hunger, and despair, and he concluded that capitalism, left unchecked, was not a system of freedom but of exploitation, a machine that reduced human beings to cogs while rewarding only those at the top. He contrasted this with socialism, which he favored not as an authoritarian doctrine, but as an ethical necessity, a way to ensure that resources and opportunities were shared more equitably. And in 1949, he published his famous essay, Why Socialism?, in which he argued that an economy planned for the well-being of all citizens, rather than the profit of a few, was essential for true democracy. In that essay, he condemned what he called the crippling of individuals under capitalism, where competition and greed distorted human character, while a planned economy guided by democratic principles could liberate human creativity and compassion. And though many recoiled at the word socialism, Einstein insisted it was the only path to avoid the chaos and inequality he saw spreading across the globe. His views placed him in sharp contrast to much of American political culture, especially during the Cold War. Yet Einstein did not waver, because his socialism was rooted not in ideology, but in humanistic values, the belief that every person deserved dignity, education, and security. And just as he opposed the violence of war, he opposed the violence of economic systems that condemned millions to poverty while enriching a few. But his critique did not stop there. Einstein went further, calling for nothing less than a reimagining of global order. He supported the creation of a world government, a supranational authority with the power to prevent wars and ensure cooperation among nations. He argued that the atomic age had made traditional nationalism obsolete, that the survival of humanity required structures that transcended borders, because if each nation continued to arm itself, to cling to sovereignty without limits, the planet would inevitably face destruction. In Einstein's view, only a global framework of law and governance could prevent the repetition of world wars. Only international cooperation could manage the terrifying power of nuclear weapons. And though such ideas were dismissed as utopian by some, Einstein believed they were not only practical but urgent. He spent years advocating for disarmament, writing letters to world leaders, and joining organizations that sought to establish such frameworks. His voice carried the moral weight of a scientist who had helped inspire the development of nuclear weapons through his famous 1939 letter warning of Nazi Germany's potential atomic program, but who then spent the rest of his life warning against the very weapons that emerged, pleading that humanity must not use science to destroy itself. In every speech, every article, every letter he wrote on politics, there is the same refrain: humanity must outgrow its addiction to violence, nationalism, and greed, and embrace cooperation, justice, and peace. Yet such convictions did not go unnoticed by those in power, and in the United States during the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare, Einstein's outspoken views made him a target. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, began monitoring him closely, seeing in his socialism and internationalism the specter of subversion. And over the years, the Bureau compiled a staggering 1,400-page dossier on him, filled with reports, intercepted communications, and suspicions. They tracked his associations, his speeches, his donations to progressive causes. They feared his influence on public opinion. And though no evidence of wrongdoing was ever found, the sheer size of the file testifies to how seriously the government regarded his political engagement. To them, he was not only a scientific genius, but a potential threat to the status quo, a man who dared to challenge capitalism, nationalism, and militarism all at once. And yet Einstein refused to be silenced. He continued to speak, to write, to protest, often signing petitions against war, against nuclear testing, against racial segregation. For Einstein also lent his voice to civil rights, supporting African American leaders, denouncing racism as America's worst disease, opening his own home to black students, and using his platform to argue that equality must extend across race and class as well as nation. In this sense, his political and social views formed a coherent whole, all rooted in a deep conviction that violence, domination, and exploitation were poisons to human progress, whether in the form of bombs, empires, or economic systems. And his alternative was always the same: reason, cooperation, compassion, the refusal to accept cruelty as inevitable, the insistence that humanity could and must do better. To hear Einstein speak of politics is to hear the echo of his science, for just as he sought unity in the laws of nature, he sought unity among human beings. And just as he rejected randomness in physics, he rejected the chaos of societies built on exploitation and war. His worldview was holistic, blending science, ethics, and activism into a singular voice. And that voice, though sometimes unpopular, became one of the most influential moral compasses of the 20th century. He was not content to be remembered only as the discoverer of relativity. He wanted to be remembered as a man who fought for peace, for justice, for humanity itself, even if it meant standing alone. And though the FBI watched, though critics mocked, Einstein's ideas have outlived them all, still relevant, still urgent, reminding us that genius without compassion is hollow, and that the true measure of greatness lies not only in discovering the secrets of the stars, but in demanding a better life for those who live beneath. Albert Einstein is often remembered as the universal genius, a citizen of the world whose theories dissolve boundaries of time and space. But beneath the surface of cosmopolitanism lay a profound and complicated relationship with his Jewish identity, an identity that, despite his personal agnosticism, shaped his life in ways that became increasingly unavoidable as the 20th century unraveled in violence, prejudice, and upheaval. And to understand Einstein's Jewish identity is is to see how a man who often distanced himself from organized religion nonetheless embraced his heritage with growing intensity, especially after the rise of Nazi Germany forced him to confront the realities of anti-Semitism and the precariousness of Jewish existence. For though Einstein had long declared himself an agnostic, rejecting dogma, ritual, and the anthropomorphic conception of God, he never rejected the cultural, ethical, and historical weight of being Jewish, and indeed he once remarked that the essence of being Jewish, to him, was not about belief in a deity, but about a moral orientation, a commitment to justice, passion, and intellectual honesty, a heritage of critical thought and survival against oppression. And when Hitler rose to power in 1933, Einstein's life was altered permanently. He became not only an exile, but also a symbol, the most famous Jewish intellectual in the world, denouncing the barbarity of Nazism, refusing to return to Germany, giving up his professorship, and turning his global platform into a weapon against fascism. His Jewish identity now inseparable from his public persona, and though he had once dreamed of borderless humanity, he now saw with unmistakable clarity that Jewish survival required solidarity, organization, and the pursuit of liberty. His embrace of Zionism was not rooted in religious yearning for the biblical land of Israel, but in pragmatic recognition that Jews needed a place of refuge, a cultural center, a spiritual home, where their identity and flourished. And as early as 1949, emphasizing especially the scattered across the nation to preserve their His public voice carried the sorrow of an entire people. He spoke and wrote with anguish about the destruction of European Jewry, and his political stance hardened in favor of a secure Jewish state, not as an abstract dream, but as an existential necessity. He became a powerful advocate for the creation of Israel after World War II, using his international prestige to sway opinion, lobbying political leaders, and participating in organizations that pressed for Jewish self-determination. And though he feared the dangers of nationalism and militarism, ever the pacifist, ever the internationalist, he understood that Jewish survival demanded sovereignty, a paradox he wrestled with but never abandoned. He wanted Israel to exist as both a refuge and a moral light, a state that would embody the ethical traditions of Judaism while protecting Jews from annihilation. And his words during this time reflect both hope and warning. Hope that Israel could be a democratic and just society, and warning that it must avoid the pitfalls of chauvinism and oppression that had plagued other nations. For Einstein envisioned a state deeply committed to peace, cultural development, and cooperation with Arabs as neighbors rather than enemies. And he frequently criticized policies or attitudes that he feared would endanger that vision. Yet his support never wavered. When Israel was declared a state in 1948, Einstein rejoiced, calling it the fulfillment of a profound historical necessity. And though he never lived there, his ties remained strong. He continued serving as a symbolic leader, writing essays and letters to encourage American Jews to support Israel, and offering moral guidance as the fledgling nation faced wars and challenges. Perhaps the most dramatic episode in this story came in 1952, after the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann, when the Israeli government formally offered Einstein the presidency, a ceremonial but deeply symbolic position, and the world held its breath as the greatest Jewish mind of the century considered the offer. But Einstein declined, humbly explaining that he lacked the natural aptitude and experience for political office, that he was too old, too accustomed to a life of research, and too blunt in his opinions to serve as a unifying head of state. Yet his refusal did not indicate distance. Rather, it revealed his honesty and humility, his refusal to accept roles he could not fulfill with integrity. And Israel respected his decision, continuing to honor him as a guiding moral figure, a Zionist supporter until his death in 1955. In his final years, Einstein's reflections on Judaism and Zionism reveal the full complexity of his thought. Still agnostic, still rejecting personal faith in a God who intervenes in history, but ever more conscious of his belonging to a people with a shared destiny, a people who had endured exile, persecution, and genocide, and who now had a homeland that could secure their future. He once wrote that being Jewish meant being part of a collective memory of suffering and resilience, and that this memory bound him to his people, even if he could not share their religious beliefs. And this sense of solidarity never left him. It animated his public life. It shaped his politics. It infused his personal identity. And it remains one of the most poignant aspects of his legacy, that the man who saw himself as a citizen of the universe also remained profoundly tied to the fate of his people. And in this we find not contradiction but balance. For Einstein understood that universality must not erase particularity, that one could be both a Jew and a humanist, both a Zionist and a critic of nationalism, both an agnostic and a bearer of religious heritage. And perhaps it was precisely this balance that made his voice so enduring, so persuasive, so full of moral gravity. His Jewish identity in Zionism cannot be understood apart from the tragedies and triumphs of the century: the rise of Hitler, the Holocaust, the birth of Israel, the dilemmas of coexistence, and the yearning for peace. And in each of these moments, Einstein stood as both participant and symbol, never denying who he was, never abandoning his people, but always insisting that Jewish destiny must align with universal ethics, that Israel must strive to be not only a safe haven, but also a beacon of justice. And even as he breathed his last in 1955, the world remembered him not only as the father of relativity, but as a Jew whose life bore witness to the resilience of his people, and whose Zionism, though unconventional, was steadfast, ethical, and deeply human. And in this long story of science and exile, persecution and glory, we glimpse the truth that identity, no matter how contested or complex, can shape even the greatest of geniuses, binding them to history, guiding their choices, and ensuring that their legacy resonates not only in the equations of physics, but in the moral struggles of humanity. In the final chapter of Albert Einstein's life, the image of the untamed hair and mischievous smile took on a softer, almost spectral quality, as though the man who had once been the very fabric of space and time was himself slowly dissolving into it, retreating from the noise of the world into the quiet twilight of existence. And yet, even as his body weakened, there was an aura of mystery, a sense that he carried secrets too vast to be spoken aloud, as though the equations he had written had not merely described the universe, but had whispered something back to him, something about endings, about eternity, about the inevitability of the void. And in those final years, the contrast between the fame impressed upon him and the simplicity with which he lived became sharper than ever. He had equations in the margins of newspapers, lecture notes, or scraps of envelopes, as if afraid that the key to the cosmos might vanish if he did not trap it quickly in ink. To those who saw him, there was something haunting about this old man, his eyes gazing beyond the horizon, as though he were already peering into another dimension, straddling the threshold of life and death, genius and ghost. The medical reality came in the form of an abdominal aortic aneurysm, a bulging weakness in the great artery that feeds the body, discovered years earlier, worsening with time. In 1948, surgeons had wrapped it with cellophane to slow its expansion, a temporary measure that offered reprieve but not cure. And by 1955, the aneurysm had grown to the point of rupture. The doctors advised surgery, but Einstein refused. He declared with characteristic calmness, "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." To those who heard these words, there was no fear in his tone, only resolve, as if death was not an enemy but a guest he had long anticipated. Perhaps he was studied like a phenomenon of nature. He believed life should end with dignity, not with a desperate clinging to machines and pain. And in this decision, we see a man who, having unraveled the mysteries of the universe, now accepted with grace the final mystery of existence itself. On April 17, 1955, Einstein collapsed at his Princeton home, taken swiftly to the Princeton Hospital, where doctors confirmed the rupture of the brain. He remained conscious, even lucid, despite the searing pain. And as nurses and physicians gathered around him, he refused surgical intervention, repeating his wish to let nature take its place. Through the night, he lay in his hospital bed, sheets drawn, a pencil and papers nearby, still scribbling equations as if determined to solve the riddle of the cosmos, even as his own body gained weight. One account suggests that his final calculations were aimed at the unified field, his last attempt to stitch the universe into a single, elegant design, though the pages were left unfinished, fragments of a dream no man could read. And here lies a haunting mystery. Did Einstein glimpse in those final hours something no one else has ever seen? Some fleeting vision of the equation that binds all reality? Did the veil between knowledge and it felt like a violation, an act of theft against a man who had sought only dignity and simplicity. For decades, the brain would travel in fragments, carried in boxes and jars from one laboratory to another, inspiring research but also controversy, a relic both revered and cursed, as if the mind that had touched the cosmos could not find peace even in death. Some said this desecration cast a strange shadow, that Einstein's ghost lingered uneasily, unwilling to rest, while his brain was dissected and studied, as though the genius who had guarded his privacy and life had been betrayed in death. And this remains one of the enduring mysteries of the story. Was Harvey's act an act of devotion to science or of hubris, stealing what did not belong to him? And does the restless fate of Einstein's brain symbolize the restless nature of genius itself, never able to settle, never able to sleep? Meanwhile, Einstein's body was treated according to his wishes, cremated swiftly, without ceremony, his ashes scattered at an undisclosed location along the Delaware River, the exact spot kept secret to prevent the creation of a shrine. In this anonymity there was a strange poetry. The man who had become the most recognized face of the world returned to the earth in silence, leaving behind no monument, no grand tomb, only equations etched in the minds of humanity, and ashes symbolized Einstein's ultimate belonging to the universe, the dissolution of his body into the elements he had studied, as if he became at last one with the space-time he had so carefully described, his atoms mingling with the flow of the cosmos. And yet, because of the missing brain, because of his secret ashes, because of the unanswered question of his final calculations, a fog of mystery still shrouds his death, leaving us to wonder if the truth of Einstein's last moments will ever be known. In the days after, tributes poured in from across the globe. Scientists, politicians, artists, and ordinary people spoke of him with reverence. To many, he was not just a scientist, but a moral voice, a prophet of peace, a symbol of the mind's power to transcend ignorance. Yet amid the glory, there were whispers of unease, questions about the brain, questions about the secrecy of his cremation, and even questions about the final equations left unfinished. Did they contain died with the answer until lost forever in the silence of that possibility? Unanswered nature of these questions as though Einstein, even in death, all the same, final years of his coordinate in the continuum of existence. And so he faced it without fear, choosing dignity over prolongation, wisdom over desperation. The story of Einstein's death has since become legend, retold with awe and sorrow, with reverence and speculation. Some see in his acceptance of death a model of courage, the final act of a philosopher-scientist who lived and died according to principle. Others see in the removal of his brain a strange parable about humanity's hunger to possess genius, to dissect it, to bottle it, even at the cost of violating the very dignity of the man who embodied it. And still others see in the scattering of his ashes a reminder that the greatest among us return to the same earth as the least, that in the end we're all but stardust. Yet what lingers most is the mystery of the unfinished notes at his bedside, the mystery of the brain wandering in jars, the mystery of a man who seemed to walk ahead of his time, who seemed to know more than he could ever say. He left us with questions as profound as the answers he provided. In Einstein's final years and death, we see not only the decline of the body, but the deepening of the legend. A story that blends fact and enigma, science and myth, until the line between them blurs. And perhaps that is fitting. For Einstein himself had said, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. And so his death, wrapped in mystery, becomes not a contradiction, but a continuation. Final expression of a life dedicated to art. From the first moment his name appeared in the journals of Europe, Albert Einstein carried an aura that seemed almost otherworldly, as if the letters themselves, E-I-N-S-T-E-I-N, glimmered with a hidden resonance, quietly whispering that the mind unbound by ordinary thought had arrived. And yet, his story began in humble stillness. A child born on March 14, 1879, in rural Kingdom of Britain. A boy who did not speak fluently until later than usual. A boy whose teachers dismissed him as slow and dull, unaware that behind those contemporary eyes the machine of the universe was already turning. In school, he displayed flashes of brilliance, rebellious spirit, and a resistance to rote memorization that frustrated some instructors but captivated others. What set him apart was a relentless curiosity. Quietly asking why the why life travel, why time seemingly After graduating from architecture, still wonder how a patent clerk in obscurity could produce ideas that would alter the very order of reality. Einstein himself described insights as revelations, complete mental images awaiting translation into mathematics, as if the universe itself whispered its hidden codes to him. The recognition was gradual. By 1909, he left the patent office for professorships, his reputation ascending steadily, yet he remained modest, walking quietly through unassuming streets. Behind the public image, however, a new intellectual storm grew. The attempt to generalize relativity, extending it beyond special relativity to encompass gravity itself. For 10 years, he wrestled with equations, until in 1915 he presented the general theory of relativity. This theory dismantled the old vision of the cosmos. Space and time were no longer static, but dynamic and pliable, curving under the influence of mass and energy. Light bent near stars, planets followed space-time curves, and the world waited for empirical confirmation. In 1919, Sir Arthur Eddington's observations of the solar eclipse verified the deflection of starlight, and overnight Einstein became a global icon. Yet fame never defined him. Behind the public admiration lay a man driven by curiosity and philosophical reflection. He sought a unified framework, a single theory, connecting the microscopic and the cosmic, probing the mysteries of quantum uncertainty and space-time itself. Colleagues marveled at his persistence, speculating whether he was tapping into pre-existing truths or platonic realm. Einstein's outward modesty and inward intensity created a paradox. A man of simple habits and warm clothes, whose mind altered humanity's understanding of reality. By the 1920s, he was not just a scientist, but a global symbol. Crowds, journalists, and politicians followed him, seeing in him a prophet of daring. Yet the man behind the myth remained the same patent office clerk who had quietly pursued questions in solitude. His genius emerged not from circumstance, but from a secret, persistent flame of curiosity, a reminder that true greatness often rises from the most unassuming beginnings. Perhaps the deepest mystery of Einstein's life is this: genius, when it appears, does so in defiance of expectation, as though destiny chose its vessel in secret. As the 1920s unfolded, the wings of Einstein as a platform. When other scientists might have basked in their equations, Einstein spoke publicly against militarism, against the blind obedience that had fueled the Great War. He supported the League of Nations, advocated for international cooperation, and warned, long before it became fashionable, of the dangers of unchecked nationalism. But even as he addressed the world, his mind remained consumed by questions that transcended politics. For at the heart of his intellectual struggle was the uneasy marriage of relativity and the strange new realm of quantum mechanics. The latter, spearheaded by figures like Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and Erwin Schrödinger, introduced a universe not of certainty, but of probability, not of smooth curves, but of abrupt jumps and inherent indeterminacy. Einstein respected their brilliance, yet he resisted their conclusions with a stubbornness that baffled his colleagues. God does not play dice with the universe, he famously quipped, refusing to accept that chance lay at the foundation of reality. To him, quantum mechanics was incomplete, a half-finished puzzle, missing the hidden variables that, if uncovered, would restore order to the cosmos. The debates between Einstein and Bohr became legendary, unfolding in conferences and tense exchanges that shaped the philosophy of science itself. Or, calm and persuasive, argued that uncertainty is not a flaw, but a feature of nature. Einstein, intense and often frustrated, crafted thought experiments designed to expose loopholes in quantum theory. Yet time and again, more apparent, quantum mechanics marched forward, establishing itself as the dominant paradigm of the microscopic world. Still, Einstein remained unconvinced and continued to search for a deeper, unified theory that would reconcile relativity and quantum mechanics into a harmonious whole. Some colleagues admired his tenacity, others pitied what they saw as a stubborn refusal to adapt. But perhaps there was something more than stubbornness. Perhaps Einstein glimpsed something beyond the equations, a coherence that had not yet revealed itself, and his refusal to surrender was not obstinacy, but fidelity to a vision only that was sense. This, too, adds to the mysterious dimension of his legacy. Was he clinging to the past, or was he, even in apparent defeat, gesturing toward a future yet to come? In 1924, Einstein received the Nobel Prize, not for relativity, but for his work in total by then, the prize manifested books were burned, his name appeared on Nazi death lists. Newspapers denounced him as a traitor. In 1933, while abroad in the United States, he made the fateful decision not to return to Germany. Instead, he accepted a position at the newly founded Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, a quiet town that would become his refuge for the rest of his life. There, in a modest house on Mercer Street, Einstein settled into a new existence, walking to his office each day, pipe in hand, still lost in thought, still seeking the equations that might unify the cosmos. But the world would not allow him the luxury of pure contemplation. As Hitler consolidated power and more clouds gathered, Einstein, a lifelong pacifist, faced a terrible dilemma. In 1939, together with fellow physicists Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, he signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning of the potential for Nazi Germany to develop an atomic bomb. The letter, though modest in tone, helped catalyze what would become the Manhattan Project. Though Einstein himself did not work on the project, and later regretted the letter, the association between his name and the bomb became indelible in public consciousness. The man who had revealed E squared, the formula that linked mass and energy, was seen, fairly or not, as the intellectual father of nuclear destruction. This haunted him. Though he had only intended to prevent catastrophe, his equation had, in the eyes of many, unleashed him. The moral weight of this irony pressed heavily on him in his later years, deepening the sense of mystery surrounding his life. Was he a savior who tried to prevent disaster, or a prophet whose revelations doomed humanity to new terrors? Yet even as the atomic age dawned, Einstein never ceased to advocate for peace. He spoke passionately against nuclear proliferation, supported the formation of the United Nations, and called for a supranational authority that could prevent future wars. He also became more involved in Jewish causes, supporting the creation of a homeland in Palestine after the horrors of the Holocaust. Though not religious in the traditional sense, he felt deeply connected to his Jewish identity, describing himself as both proud and burdened by it. In him, science and moral conviction intertwined, and the world looked to him not only as a physicist, but as a conscience. In Princeton, Einstein's life required a privilege and quiet living. Neighborhoods walking on the violin. A language that like mathematics spoke directly to the structure. He could sit together, improvising notes on the rock. attempt to merge gravitation and electromagnetism into a single framework. Page after page, equation after equation, he struggled, often in isolation, while younger physicists dismissed his efforts as outdated. Quantum mechanics was ascending, and Einstein's reluctance to embrace it left him increasingly marginalized in the scientific community. But he did not waver. To him, the quest for unity was not merely academic, it was metaphysical, almost spiritual. He believed that nature could not be so fragmented, that beneath the apparent chaos lay a deeper order. Did he ever glimpse it fully? Did he come close in ways we cannot yet measure? Some scholars suggest that in his unpublished notebooks lie fragments of insights that remain unexplored, hints at equations that might still one day find their place in physics. If so, then the mystery deepens. Did Einstein, even in his so-called decline, touch upon truths still hidden from us? There are stories, whispered among historians, that in his last years Einstein confided to a few close friends that he felt he had seen the outline of the answer, though he lacked the time to complete it. What did he mean? Was it a polite consolation to himself? Or did he truly glimpse the architecture of reality in ways we still cannot fathom? The line between myth and mystery blurs here, as it often does in the lives of those whose genius transcends measure. By the time the 1940s and 1950s unfolded, Albert Einstein had become something more than a scientist. He had become a symbol, almost mythological in stature. The image of his wild hair, his kind yet penetrating eyes, and his quiet pipe-smoking strolls through Princeton carried a weight beyond any single equation. He was revered as the voice of conscience in an age dominated by nuclear shadows, a man who had unlocked the atom, yet warned against its use. But while the world placed him on a pedestal, Einstein himself remained both amused and slightly bewildered by the cult of personality that surrounded him. It is strange to be so universally known and yet so lonely. For though crowds adored him, only a handful of minds could truly follow his thoughts into the labyrinth of space, time, and matter dissolved into abstract symbols and whispered symmetries. It was in those Princeton years that Einstein grew ever more vocal about a lifelong passion. He outlined his belief that unregulated markets led to chaos and injustice, and he expressed cautious support for socialism as a system that could provide fairness and dignity. Yet unlike rigid ideologues, Einstein's socialism was rooted not in dogma but in moral concern. He valued individual freedom and warned against bureaucratic tyranny. What he envisioned was a society where creativity and compassion flourished, where human beings were not reduced to mere cogs in a machine of profit. His critics accused him of naivete, but his words resonated with those who saw in him not only a scientist, but a moral philosopher wrestling with the great dilemmas of modern life. Such convictions, combined with his Jewish heritage and his fame, drew the suspicion of the FBI during the Red Scare era in the United States. J. Edgar Hoover's bureau compiled a massive 1,400-page dossier on Einstein, monitoring his speeches, his correspondence, even his friendships. They saw in him a potential subversive, a man whose calls for peace and social justice were, in the fevered climate of McCarthyism, interpreted as signs of communist sympathy. Yet Einstein remained undeterred. He publicly criticized McCarthyism as a betrayal of American values, urged intellectuals to resist conformity, and defended freedom of thought as the bedrock of civilization. In private, he sometimes joked about the absurdity of being watched, but beneath the humor lay a deeper sadness, the recognition that the very ideals of liberty and reason he had cherished were under siege. Meanwhile, in the quiet solitude of his study, Einstein never abandoned his scientific quest. The unified field theory remained his obsession, the horizon he pursued even as his health declined. Visitors to his office would find chalkboards covered in dense equations, pages scattered in piles, and Einstein punched over them with the same intensity he had once produced relativity. He was no longer at the center of mainstream physics, which now celebrated quantum electrodynamics and particle accelerators, but he seemed strangely at peace with his isolation. To know that what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty, this knowledge, this feeling, is at the center of true religiousness. For Einstein, the search for unity was more than physics. It was emotion, Einstein refused surgery, insisting that it was tasteless to prolong life artificially. "It is enough," he said. On the morning of April 18th, he passed away at Princeton Hospital, leaving behind not only a scientific legacy unparalleled in modern history, but also an unfinished manuscript of equations, his final attempt to glimpse the grand unity of nature. His brain, removed without his family's permission, would become the subject of decades of study, as though even in death, the world would not let go of its fascination with the mind and reshape reality. Some claim to find structural peculiarities, others argue over the ethics of such an act. But the allure of mystery persisted. Was there something physically unique about Einstein's brain, or was his genius an irreducible mystery beyond biology? And so, the life of Albert Einstein closes with as many questions as it answers. He was a man of science, yet he spoke often in the language of philosophy and even spirituality. He was a pacifist whose name became linked with the bomb. He was a socialist in belief, yet an icon of capitalist America. He was celebrated everywhere, yet spied upon by the very nation that sheltered him. He was a scientist who transformed physics, yet he spent his final decades dismissed by many of his peers. These contradictions do not diminish his legacy, they deepen it, wrapping it in layers of paradox and mystery. Perhaps that is why Einstein endures not only as a historical figure, but as a symbol. The sage who peered into the universe and found both beauty and terror. The rebel who refused to surrender to convention. The visionary whose questions continue to echo long after his answers. When we speak of Einstein, we speak not only of relativity or quantum, of time dilation or curvature of space-time. We speak of the unyielding pursuit of truth, of the courage to stand against rule, of the imagination that sees beyond the visible. We speak of the violent melodies that float in dimly lit rooms, of the solitary walks where equations are followed by constellations, of the letters to strangers which offer fragments of wisdom. And we speak too of the mysteries that remain unsolved. Did he glimpse the unified fabric of reality? Was his resistance to quantum mechanics stubbornness or foresight? Do the unpublished notes contain clues to a future physics still awaiting discovery? Perhaps these questions are more And in that liminal space, Einstein still walks, violin in hand, hair untamed, eyes distant yet kind, inviting us always to follow the questions